I had just settled into my small flat on the 5th floor of an Edwardian building in East London when the knock came. Not a polite, hesitant tap, but a decisive, impatient rap that echoed through the hallway like a demand. Glancing at the antique clock on my mantelpiece, I noted it was 11:47 on a Wednesday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not my parents. Through the peephole, I recognized my father's stern profile, Marcus Harding, once a decorated police detective, now sporting a crisp navy blazer over a designer shirt. Behind him stood my mother, Eleanor, her warm brunette curls pinned back in a style I associated with every important conversation of my childhood. I slid open the door just enough to engage the chain. "Adam," my mother began, her voice soft, but carrying that unmistakable weight of obligation. "We need to talk about Oliver." Oliver, my younger brother, was 24 and engaged to be married in 3 months. I couldn't quite fathom why my parents were here at midnight discussing his wedding budget. "Come in," I said, unchaining the door. The scent of my father's cologne mingled with my mother's floral perfume as they stepped into my living room without waiting for an invitation. The space felt cramped. The well-worn sofa, my books stacked precariously on the coffee table, the framed photograph of me receiving a professional accolade on the shelf above the fireplace. They scanned everything, assessing my life in moments. My offer of tea was met with weary smiles. "This isn't a social visit," Marcus said, folding his arms. "Oliver's wedding venue demands full payment by next Friday, and there's an unexpected shortfall." I frowned. I prided myself on structure and order, qualities that had served me well as a lead data engineer at Greenstream Innovations. The numbers in my spreadsheets never lied. They couldn't guilt me into covering someone else's mistake. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, pouring hot water over a tea bag. My mother inhaled, as though summoning courage. £17,000. The figure hung in the air like an accusation. £17,000, money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a one-bedroom flat of my own, away from the narrow expectations of family life. I suggested they'd consider a bank loan, or even Oliver asking his own employer for an advance. Eleanor's smile tightened. "Banks are reluctant for people our age, Adam. And Oliver's savings, well, he's young and starting out in marketing at a small firm. He doesn't earn like you do." The exchange reminded me of every childhood sacrifice I'd made, giving up my slice of cake so Oliver could have seconds, lending him my bike when my part-time job depended on me cycling to the office, proofreading his university essays while he attended social gatherings. I was well versed in family first. I took a careful sip of tea. "What about Oliver's savings, or contributions from his fiancée, Matilda?" Marcus exchanged a look with Eleanor. "Matilda works part-time at a pub, and her hours have been cut. She's been devoting time to wedding planning. Oliver has been helping her with catering contacts and linens." I nearly laughed. Helping with linens? It was obvious they'd run through every available resource. They expected me, always me, to fill the gap. "I'll think about it," I said, setting the cup down with more force than intended. The clink against the saucer felt oddly satisfying. They left without another word, the door clicking shut with an unmistakable finality. I stood in the center of my living room, the silence now feeling alien after their departure. £17,000, nearly half of my lifelong savings, meant handing over everything I'd built for one day of celebration. The idea churned in my mind as I wandered to the window and gazed out at the River Thames, its dark water reflecting the city lights like a mirror of lies. Tomorrow I decided I would seek the true story behind Oliver's finances. That night, though, I simply allowed myself to remember what it felt like to be free from everyone else's emergencies. The next morning, I arrived at my office on the 21st floor of the glass tower in Canary Wharf, feeling uncharacteristically tense. My role as lead data engineer required precision, but my thoughts were anything but orderly. Over a latte in the empty break room, I plotted my strategy. Suggest a business loan, propose a payment plan for Oliver, or encourage him to seek assistance from Matilda's family. All reasonable solutions, yet I knew they would be dismissed. At precisely 10:30, my phone buzzed, 2 missed calls from my mother and a terse text. "Have you considered a loan? We need an answer." I typed back. Loan terms aren't favourable. They'd require collateral I can't afford to tie up. Seconds later, my inbox pinged with an email from Eleanor. "We're not asking for charity, Adam. We're asking for family support." Beneath that polite veneer lay the same manipulative undertone I'd heard since childhood, my worth measured by my willingness to bail them out. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. Steeling myself, I drafted a reply. Before I make any decisions, I need full clarity on Oliver's budget and Matilda's contributions. I hit send and reopened my project dashboard, diving into lines of code that suddenly felt soothingly predictable. Data obeyed logic. Family did not. After lunch, I took my customary walk along the South Bank, past the Tate Modern and the River Thames thrumming beneath Millennium Bridge. I couldn't shake the thought that my parents had never once checked on my own financial well-being or asked how I was managing student loans and rent. It had always been about Oliver, his comfort, his happiness, his fairy tale day. Back at my desk, I began a preliminary digital audit. Public records showed that Oliver's marketing salary at Woodvale Partners was just under £28,000 per annum, enough to save modestly, but not nearly enough to fund a lavish reception. I found Matilda's LinkedIn profile listing her as a part-time events assistant at the Globe pub with unpredictable hours. A quick check on Companies House revealed no co-owned business ventures in their names. My suspicion grew that the wedding shortfall was merely a symptom of deeper financial negligence. By mid-afternoon, I drafted an email to a firm of private investigators recommended by a colleague. I require discreet inquiry into personal and business finances of immediate family members. Please advise on retainer and timeline. Hitting send, I felt a small surge of empowerment. For the first time, I was shifting from anxious reaction to proactive investigation. My calendar reminder popped up. Team meeting with Greenstream Innovations, Q3 roadmap. I switched back to professional mode, presenting architecture updates and cloud migration strategies. My colleagues nodded appreciatively at my clarity and foresight, unaware of the personal storm brewing behind my composed exterior. When the workday finally ended, I paused by the rooftop terrace overlooking the skyline. The city lights sparkled, the same lights I'd admired through my window last night, feeling free for a fleeting moment. Now I realized freedom required more than fleeting moments. It demanded boundaries, accountability, and the courage to demand truth. As I descended the elevator, my phone buzzed again, this time a WhatsApp from Matilda. "Oliver says you're being difficult. I'm so stressed." I drafted a curt but honest reply. "I need full transparency before I commit any funds. Please understand." I pressed send and stepped onto the bustling street, the damp air carrying a promise of rain. Tomorrow, I would hear back from my investigator. And then the real reckoning would begin. The following morning, My inbox contained a single message from the investigating firm. Preliminary findings available. Can meet tomorrow at 2 in the city. My pulse quickened. I arranged to leave the office early and headed straight to a quiet cafe near Bank. The investigator, a composed woman named Priya Malik, greeted me with a firm handshake and a stack of binders. We sat at a corner table, the muted hum of espresso machines and keyboard clicks forming a steady backdrop. Priya slid the first binder across to me. Here are financial statements for Oliver Harding and Matilda Quinn. I opened it to find detailed bank records outlining their joint and separate accounts over the past 2 years. The numbers leapt off the page. Oliver's personal account showed a steady salary deposit just under £24,000 annually, offset by monthly transfers to a joint event planning account totaling over £14,000 each year. Matilda's account revealed inconsistent deposits from bar shifts no more than £500 per month, with occasional large cash withdrawals that went unexplained. Priya leaned forward. They've maintained a standard of living well beyond their combined income. The excess funds were drawn on credit lines, multiple cards with a total limit of £48,000, all currently maxed out. A chill ran through me. I'd suspected debt, but this confirmed living on borrowed time, on borrowed money, I'd be expected to repay. I flipped to the next binder, invoices from wedding planners, florists and caterers. Each document listed deposits paid by H&Q Events, the company name Matilda had registered 3 months ago. No corporate filings existed for H&Q beyond the registration itself. It was apparently a shell through which they'd funneled wedding payments and personal expenses alike. Why hide it through a company? I muttered.
Perhaps to obscure the true expense from family oversight, Priya suggested.
They've also been posting lavish social media updates, 5-star restaurant dinners, designer boutique shopping that do not align with their declared income. I recall scrolling through their Insta stories at 3 a.m., wondering how they afforded
fine champagne.
Now I understood charges on luxury purchases coded as event decor or business supplies flowing through Matilda's developments. My mind raced. This wasn't merely a case of naive overspending, it was deliberate misrepresentation. They'd constructed a facade of success to justify asking me for £17,000. I closed the binder and looked at Priya. Is there evidence of family transfers? She produced bank statements with family trust transactions, regular sums moving from Oliver's account into a joint trust labelled Harding Family Fund, earmarked for housing and family services, but actually spent on flights, luxury gifts, and private party bookings. They've been siphoning money through that fund for months, Priya said. Until now, no one questioned it. I felt both vindication and rage. My parents had been complicit, enablers of this charade, pressuring me to cover the gap they collectively engineered. I closed the binders. Thank you, Priya. This is more than enough. I'll need copies of everything for personal reference. As I left the cafe, I forwarded the documents to my secure work email, ensuring I had access even if I changed devices.
Rain had started falling in gentle sheets, drumming against the pavement as I walked back toward the tower. Each drop felt like a cleansing, washing away illusions. Tomorrow I would confront Oliver and Matilda with irrefutable proof.
And then I'd decide whether £17,000 would remain mine or become a down payment on my freedom. That evening, I left the office early and made my way to the Copper Lantern, a dimly lit gastropub in Shoreditch where Oliver often met Matilda after work. The air inside was warm with hushed conversations, the scent of char-grilled vegetables and beer-scented wood. I spotted Oliver at a corner table, sleeves rolled up, revealing tattooed forearms, his gaze fixed on a half-empty pint of ale. Matilda sat beside him, scrolling on her phone beneath soft, amber lighting. I approached their table and cleared my throat. Oliver looked up first, surprise flickering in his dark eyes. "Adam, what are you doing here?" I slid into the empty chair opposite him. "We need to talk, Oliver, in private." Matilda stiffened. "Is this about the wedding money?" "Partly," I said, folding my arms. "But there's more." I placed my cane leather folder on the table and opened it to the first set of documents, bank statements, invoices, and a summary prepared by Priya. I slid the bundle toward Oliver. "These are your financial records from the last 2 years. He ran a hand through his hair. "You can't show those. That's private." "Not anymore," I replied quietly. "Your deposits total just under £24,000 each year, but your withdrawals exceed 38,000. You've been living on credit lines you never intended to repay." Matilda's lips quivered. "That's not fair."
"We had plans." "Plans you funded with debt," I said. "And then you hid those expenses through an entity you didn't register properly. H&Q Events is just a shell, Matilda." She looked stricken.
"We thought it would simplify things, not deceive." "Oh, but it did deceive," I said, voice firm. "And your parents, Eleanor and Marcus, have been complicit, transferring money from Oliver's account into a family fund that then covered their own expenses. £17,000 is not just for your wedding, it's part of a much larger pattern." Oliver set down his pint and leaned forward. "You hired a private investigator? You went behind our backs?" "I went behind your backs to find the truth," I answered. "I can't support your wedding with my savings when you've been siphoning money for other purposes." Matilda swallowed hard. "What do you want from us?" "I want transparency," I said. "I want every penny accounted for. You'll draw up a repayment plan for your credit card balances, £48,000 in total, and freeze your wedding expenses until then." Oliver's knuckles whitened. "You can't cancel our wedding." "I'm not cancelling it," I said. "I'm postponing any further financial support until you demonstrate responsibility, and I'm informing our parents they will no longer access your accounts or pressure me for money." A heavy silence fell. Around us, other patrons murmured, but their words were distant echoes. I took a steadying breath. "I'm giving you a chance to fix this, but if you lie or if you fail to meet the repayment schedule, I will involve legal counsel, and the wedding venue will be notified that the deposit is withdrawn." Matilda's eyes filled with tears. "Adam, please, we love each other. We just got carried away." "That love doesn't excuse fraud," I said gently. "You both need help, financial counseling, budgeting skills, honesty, and I will support you through that, but not as long as deception continues." Oliver exhaled, looking defeated. "We'll do it," he said low. "We'll fix this." I nodded. "Good. I'll send you the documents tonight. Review them. We'll reconvene here in 1 week with a formal plan." As I left the copper lantern, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't merely a code cruncher shielding my family's mistakes. I was holding them accountable. The path ahead would be rocky, but it was the only way toward true repair. The next morning, I awoke to an unfamiliar sense of clarity. After the confrontation at the Copper Lantern, I felt a shift, not just in Oliver and Matilda's predicament, but in the very dynamic that had defined my life. I made coffee and reviewed the documents Priya had provided late last night, compiling a concise summary of debts, transactions, and family fund transfers. £17,000 was only the tip of an iceberg that totalled nearly £100,000 of misused credit. By 9 o'clock, I was back at my desk in the glass tower. My colleagues at Greenstream Innovations were already immersed in code reviews and sprint planning. I greeted them with a measured smile and immersed myself in Python scripts, but my mind kept drifting toward an entirely different project. The small consultancy firm my parents co-founded nearly a decade ago, Horizon Strategy Group. Horizon had once been thriving, a boutique advisory shop specializing in non-profit governance. Marcus's law enforcement connections had opened doors, and Eleanor's penchant for networking had kept the clients coming. But in the past 2 years, I'd noticed their LinkedIn posts grow sporadic, their website updates stale. I had assumed they were simply stepping back from work to support Oliver's wedding, but now I suspected deeper financial strain. At lunchtime, I opened Companies House records on my secondary screen. Horizon Strategy Group's filings showed annual revenue sliding from £500,000 to under £300,000. Their retained earnings were dwindling, and there was a small but troubling note, an outstanding loan secured against the company's only significant asset, its name and goodwill. Beyond that, I discovered that Horizon's directors had advanced themselves tens of thousands in special dividends that far outstripped profits. In effect, they'd been paying themselves from borrowed capital. A plan began to crystallize. If Horizon was on the brink of insolvency, their stake in the business, nearly all of it owned equally by my parents, could be acquired at a fraction of its real value. Once I took control, I could set new financial protocols, restore transparency, and prevent any further familial exploitation of company resources. More importantly, I could realign the power balance in our relationship. I drafted an email to Jennifer Yates, a corporate lawyer recommended by my friend at Morrison & Finch. My fingers hovered over the keys. Subject: Inquiry, Acquisition of Horizon Strategy Group. Dear Jennifer, I hope you're well. I'm considering a potential acquisition of Horizon Strategy Group, a small consultancy currently in financial distress. I require guidance on valuation, due diligence, and the mechanics of securing a controlling interest in a private limited company. Please let me know your availability for an initial consultation. Best regards, Adam Harding. I hit send and leaned back. My coffee had gone cold, but I hardly noticed. Later in the afternoon, I shared my lunch break with Sarah, the systems architect. She asked about my distracted moods, and I half joked, thinking about buying a failing business. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Some things were better kept close to the chest. By the end of the workday, I received 2 responses. One from Matilda confirming that she and Oliver would begin drafting a repayment schedule, and another from Jennifer Yates offering a meeting the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. A week earlier, I would have balked at the thought of confronting corporate complexity. Now, it felt like the next logical step. Ownership, accountability, and the authority to implement genuine change. These concepts buoyed me more than any spreadsheet ever could. As I shut down my workstation and gathered my coat, I felt that familiar hum of anticipation. London's evening light was soft and golden as I descended into the street. The prospect of challenging my parents on the corporate stage, of reclaiming my agency once and for all, filled me with purpose. Tomorrow I'd draft an informal valuation, work out my financing options, and prepare to step into boardroom negotiations. The path ahead was uncharted territory, but I was no longer afraid of boundary setting or tough conversations. I was finally ready to own both my future and the legacy my family had built. Tuesday arrived with a pale autumn mist drifting through Canary Wharf's glass canyons. By 9:30, I found myself in the oak-panelled reception area of Yates & Partners, corporate lawyers to the city's most discreet deals. Jennifer Yates greeted me in a tailored charcoal suit, silver hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, her presence both warm and formidable. "Adam, good to see you," she said, extending a hand. We proceeded to her office on the 7th floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Thames curving toward Greenwich. I laid out my objectives: purchase a controlling interest in Horizon Strategy Group, value the company fairly given its distressed state, and structure the acquisition so I could immediately implement governance reforms. Jennifer nodded, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "From what you describe, Horizon is a private limited company whose share capital is tightly held. We'll need to begin with due diligence on their financial statements, directors' loans, outstanding liabilities, and any secured assets. Given their declining revenue and debt levels, negotiation leverage will be substantial." She produced a checklist. 1. Review of the past 5 years' audited accounts and management accounts for the current year. 2. Analysis of directors' loan balances and any informal advances made to shareholders. 3. Examination of creditor schedules, including HMRC and any secured lenders. 4. Assessment of ongoing contracts, client engagements and supplier agreements to determine the valuation of goodwill. 5. Confirmation of any off-balance sheet liabilities, such as potential litigation or lease obligations. Jennifer recommended engaging an independent accountant to prepare a valuation report under the price-to-earnings and asset-based methods. She introduced me to Marcus Lee, a chartered accountant with expertise in mergers and acquisitions, whose office was just down the corridor. Within 24 hours, I had scheduled a meeting with Marcus and forwarded Horizon's company's house filings and the incomplete management accounts I'd downloaded online. Meanwhile, Jennifer drafted a letter of intent outlining my interest in acquiring up to 80% of the share capital, conditional on satisfactory due diligence, and proposed a timeline for exclusivity during negotiations. Leaving Yates & Partners, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The legal framework was forming, my resources marshalled for a decisive move. I stopped for lunch at a nearby cafe and messaged Oliver and Matilda. "I'm initiating formal acquisition proceedings for Horizon. Once I hold controlling shares, I will address their finances and halt any further misuse of funds. Expect updates." By early evening, Marcus Lee had called with his preliminary findings after reviewing the limited accounts. Horizon's accumulated losses stood at just under £120,000. Directors' loans exceeded £50,000, largely unpaid advances to Eleanor and Marcus. Outstanding VAT liabilities and unsecured creditor claims amounted to nearly £45,000. Existing client contracts projected revenue of roughly £280,000 this year, but with profit margins eroded by overhead. We agreed that a fair acquisition price for an 80% stake would be in the region of £30,000 to £40,000, essentially covering the company's liabilities and residual goodwill. Anything above that would require justification tied to future earnings or planned restructuring benefits. That night, I reflected on the day's progress while preparing dinner in my flat. In the span of a few hours, I had moved from family mediator into a position of genuine corporate authority. The prospect of reshaping Horizon's governance, implementing transparent financial controls, and recovering funds owed to the company and potentially to my personal coffers filled me with both anticipation and resolve. Tomorrow I would finalize my offer letter with Jennifer, then contact my bank for bridging finance to cover the initial payment. The path to ownership was clearer than ever, and I embraced the responsibility wholeheartedly. No longer merely the dependable sibling responding to crises, I was now the architect of systemic change, both in my family and in business. On Thursday morning, I arrived at my local branch of Archwell Bank, briefcase in hand, prepared to finalize provisional financing. The polished marble lobby gleamed under recessed lighting, and the receptionist directed me to Mr. Daniel Chung, the relationship manager who'd helped me secure a small business loan 3 years earlier. Daniel greeted me with a firm handshake. "Good to see you again, Adam. What can I do for you today?" I laid out my plan succinctly. An acquisition of Horizon Strategy Group at an agreed-upon valuation, a bridging loan to cover the £35,000 purchase price, and a line of credit to fund the initials. Working capital infusion. Daniel nodded, reviewing my documents. "Your financials are solid," he said. "Your assets and income support this level of lending. We can extend a short-term facility with a competitive interest rate, subject to our usual covenants. I'll prepare a term sheet by close of business." Relief washed through me. Within hours, I'd have the means to move forward. I excused myself and returned to my flat to wait for the bank's confirmation. By late afternoon, the bank's term sheet awaited my signature. A 6-month bridge loan of £40,000 with a 5.5% annual interest rate, secured against my investment portfolio and an assignment of Horizon's business assets. I signed electronically and forwarded a copy to Jennifer Yates, copying Marcus Lee. The pieces were in motion. On Friday morning, I met with Jennifer in her conference room at 7. I insisted we keep this before the weekend to respect Horizon's operating hours. With a clear letter of intent in hand, she guided me through the final draft. Letter of intent to Eleanor and Marcus Harding, directors, Horizon Strategy Group Limited. From Adam Harding. Date Friday. Exact date 2025. Re-proposal to acquire 80% of share capital of Horizon Strategy Group Limited. Pursuant to our discussions and based on publicly available financial information and preliminary due diligence, I am prepared to acquire 80% of the issued share capital of Horizon Strategy Group Limited for a total consideration of £35,000, subject to 1. Completion of comprehensive due diligence to confirm disclosed liabilities and assets. 2. Execution of a share purchase agreement on terms customary for transactions of this nature. 3. A 90-day exclusivity period during which Horizon will not solicit alternative offers. Upon closing, I will assume authority to implement governance reforms, financial controls, and immediate repayment oversight of all outstanding directors' loans. I look forward to your timely response. Jennifer printed and signed beneath my typed name, then enclosed the letter in an embossed envelope addressed to Ms. E. Harding and Mr. M. Harding at Horizon's registered office on Finsbury Square. We drove together to the post box outside the Royal Exchange, and I dropped the letter with deliberate calm. The weekend stretched ahead with promise. My phone buzzed intermittently, Oliver confirming that he and Matilda would begin compiling necessary documents, Daniel at the bank awaiting any additional signatures, and Jennifer scheduling our next meeting for Monday morning to discuss next steps. On Saturday afternoon, I took a walk through Hampstead Heath, letting the autumn breeze clear my mind. In the distance, the golden leaves framed the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral against a cerulean sky. I realized that this acquisition meant more than financial control. It symbolized the first time I was charting my own course rather than reacting to familial expectations. By Sunday, I was ready. The offer letter was delivered, the bank was primed, and my lawyer was on standby. Monday morning would bring Eleanor and Marcus's response, and with it, the critical turning point in both my career and my family life.
I felt anticipation rather than dread. For the first time, I was moving forward on my own terms. Monday began with a restless sleep interrupted by the insistent chime of my phone.
At 8:15, I opened an email from Jennifer Yates. Response received. Let's discuss. I gathered my notes and headed back to Yates and Partners. The city was just coming to life under a hazy dawn sky, trams trundling past the windows as I rode the tube from Shoreditch. In Jennifer's office, the letter lay on her mahogany desk, marked with 2 crisp stamps, one from Horizon's registered office and another from our postbox drop-off. Jennifer offered me a reassuring nod. "They've accepted your terms," she said.
They're open to the share purchase agreement and the 90-day exclusivity.
They did, however, request minor adjustments to the closing date, proposing 30 rather than 90 days, and asked for clarity on the director's loan repayment timeline. I felt a surge of triumph. Horizon's directors, my own parents, had no choice but to negotiate. 30 days is acceptable, I replied. As for the directors' loans, I expect full repayment schedules to commence within 30 days of completion, with final settlement within 120 days. Jennifer drafted the amendment while I reviewed my personal diary. The days since. The wedding confrontation, the bank meetings, the legal consultations. In little more than a week, I had gone from a family hostage to orchestrator of my own destiny. By mid-morning, the revised letter of intent was signed and sent back to Horizon. Jennifer copied me on an email confirming exclusive negotiation rights until the end of next month. I messaged Oliver and Matilda, LOI accepted. Next steps, due diligence and SPA drafting. I'll handle the legal details. You focus on compiling any requested documents. With that in motion, I turned to another pressing matter, my parents' wedding plea that had triggered this entire sequence. I drafted a concise email to Eleanor and Marcus, subject, family fund, transfers and reconciliation. Dear Mum and Dad, thank you for engaging in the acquisition process. As we move toward closing, I need clarity on all past family fund transfers from Oliver's accounts. Please provide a detailed ledger of transfers labeled Harding Family Fund for the last 24 months by this Friday. This information is crucial for finalizing both corporate and familial reconciliation. Love, Adam. I paused before clicking send. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about accountability, and making them respect that principle was more important than sentimental ties. The afternoon brought a flurry of calls, Marcus Lee requesting additional Horizon financial documents, Daniel Chung confirming loan paperwork was en route, and Oliver asking if he could stop by my flat later for a quick debrief. I agreed. Despite the earlier awkwardness, I wanted him to see I wasn't purely punitive. I wanted him to step toward responsibility. At 6, Oliver arrived, shoulders slumped but eyes determined. He carried a folder bulging with receipts, fund statements and notes. "I've done as you asked," he said quietly, placing it on my coffee table. "Everything is in here, tracking every transfer." I smiled. "Thank you, Oliver. This is the first step. We discussed next week's due diligence meetings and the importance of transparency." He nodded, resolving to rebuild trust. Later, as I closed my flat door behind me, I stood for a moment in silence. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the city's pulse felt steadier under my control. I had redirected the currents of my family's fortune, and, in doing so, charted a new course for myself. The path wasn't easy nor free of conflict, but it was mine to walk. And that realization, above all, was worth more than any amount of money I'd once been compelled to give away. By Wednesday morning, the crisp London air carried a decisive energy. I arrived early at Horizon Strategy Group's modest Finsbury Square offices, keycard in hand. The familiar scent of aged carpet and espresso greeted me as I stepped into the reception area. Behind the glass partition, a lonely display of Horizon's old client awards reminded me how far the company had slipped and how close I was to turning it around. I rode the lift to the second floor and paused outside the boardroom, checking my reflection in the polished door. Inside, Eleanor and Marcus sat at the long table, papers and tablets arrayed before them. They looked up as I entered. Eleanor's blue blouse was immaculate. Marcus's tie was straight, but both wore expressions of guarded anticipation. "Good morning," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for compiling the Harding Family Fund ledger. I'll need to review each entry, but first, let's discuss due diligence." I gestured to the pile of documents I'd brought: 3 binders of management accounts, credit agreements, lease contracts, and emails between Horizon's founders and key clients.
Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she accepted a binder. Marcus cleared his throat. "We've been through this," he said, voice low. "You already have the files we agreed to share?" I nodded politely.
"These are the documents Marcus Lee requested. We need them in this format for our accountant's analysis. Accuracy is essential." I opened the binder to reveal detailed balance sheets and profit and loss statements. First point, our liabilities exceed assets by nearly £60,000. We must address this deficit immediately. Marcus glanced at Eleanor, who swallowed. "We know," she said softly. "We're prepared to discuss the loan repayments." "Excellent," I replied. "Let's set concrete timelines. All outstanding directors' loans, £50,000 total, must be scheduled for repayment in monthly instalments over the next 120 days. Failure to meet any payment will constitute a breach of our agreement and trigger default provisions." Eleanor nodded, searching my face for mercy. "We understand." I handed her a printed schedule template. "Please fill in your proposed installments by end of day. Then, on to governance. I intend to overhaul our financial controls. Effective immediately, no single director may authorize expenditures over £1,000 without dual sign-off." I paused to let the implications sink in. "This includes family members." Silence followed. Marcus cleared his throat. "And what of our roles? We founded this firm. Are we losing our positions?" I met his gaze squarely. "You will remain directors until closing, but your authority will be limited. Strategic decisions, client engagements, new hires, and capital expenditures will require my approval." I clicked the remote to display a flowchart on the conference room screen. 3-tier decision-making moving from director proposal to owner. Approval to implementation team. Marcus's jaw tightened as he absorbed the structural change. Eleanor's voice quavered. "This feels harsh." I leaned forward. "Perhaps, but it is necessary. Under the previous arrangements, personal advances and lack of oversight brought us to the brink. My goal is to restore stability and growth, not to punish. Transparency and accountability are the cornerstones of any successful enterprise." I closed the laptop and gathered my notes. "Finally, I've arranged meetings with our largest clients next week to reaffirm our commitment and outline the renewed governance structure. Your continued cooperation is critical." Eleanor rose to her feet, smoothing her skirt. "We will comply, Adam. Thank you for guiding us through this." Marcus stood as well. "We appreciate your leadership." As I left the boardroom, I felt the weight shift unmistakably. The directors had accepted my terms. They were no longer equals, but custodians under my ownership. The path to redemption for Horizon had begun, and with it, my own liberation from a lifetime of familial obligation. The road ahead would be challenging, but now, for the first time, I truly led. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation and introspection. Saturday morning found me in a small meeting room at Marcus Lee's accounting offices near Moorgate. The scent of fresh coffee and polished wood permeated the air as Marcus, a bespectacled professional in his mid-40s, unpacked his spreadsheets and valuation reports. "Adam," he began, sliding a thick folder across the table, "I've completed the detailed valuation under both price-to-earnings and asset-based methods. Given Horizon's current financial distress, its intangible goodwill is minimal. Your offer of £35,000 for 80% control remains well within a fair range. I recommend proceeding to draft the share purchase agreement accordingly." I nodded, absorbing every word. The numbers confirmed what I already knew. Although my parents had built Horizon from scratch, overspending and poor oversight had eroded its value. Now I had the facts to justify the next step. Marcus tapped a line on the balance sheet. "You'll need to allocate an additional £5,000 escrow to cover deferred creditor claims and potential VAT adjustments. That brings your total commitment to £40,000, but it secures a clean balance sheet post-closing." I made a note. £40,000 total consideration payable upon signing. The slight increase was acceptable. I thanked Marcus and left with a renewed sense of purpose. Sunday afternoon I drafted the definitive share purchase agreement with Jennifer Yates. The document spanned over 20 pages, detailing representations, warranties, covenants, and indemnities. Key clauses included 1. Purchase price £40,000 for 80% of issued shares payable via bank transfer on closing. 2. Escrow arrangement £5,000 held for 90 days to satisfy any contingent liabilities. 3. Director loan repayment, mandatory schedule of monthly installments over 120 days, failure to comply triggering default. 4. Post-closing governance, immediate appointment of myself as managing director with sole authority over financial and strategic decisions. 5. Employee protections, assurance that any workforce restructuring would honor statutory notice periods and redundancy obligations. I reviewed each section, ensuring the tone balanced firmness with fairness. Family relationships might be strained, but professional agreements demanded clarity above all else. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I met Jennifer in her conference room at 9 o'clock. We signed the SPA, her pen gliding across the signature line beneath my name. The weight of the commitment settled in my chest. This was real. Next, we sent the signed copies to Horizon's registered office and arranged for electronic transfers via Archwell Bank. At 10:30, I drove to Finsbury Square with Jennifer and a bank representative. In the same boardroom where I'd first dictated terms, we executed the share transfer documents. Eleanor and Marcus sat opposite me, expressions a mixture of relief and resignation. As the final digital signature was applied, I felt the shift in the air. Horizon Strategy Group was mine. I rose and addressed them both. "Thank you for your cooperation. Our first board meeting under new ownership will convene next Monday." We'll review updated financials, approve the new budget, and set immediate priorities." Their nods were formal but genuine. That afternoon, I held informal gatherings with Horizon's key staff, consultants and administrators who had weathered the company's decline. I outlined the vision: a leaner cost structure, transparent financial processes, and renewed focus on client relationships. The atmosphere, once heavy with uncertainty, brightened as I shared concrete plans: immediate restructuring of director loans, streamlined billing procedures, and a commitment to professional development for every employee. As evening fell, I returned home to my flat, the autumn sun casting long shadows across my desk. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the page, "Horizon Strategy Group, Year 1 Goals." Beneath, I listed targets: achieve profitability by Q4, reduce overhead by 20%, and rebuild client trust through monthly progress reports. Finishing the list, I leaned back and inhaled deeply. The acquisition had granted me more than control over a business. It had bestowed the authority to reshape a family legacy for the better. No longer burdened by unspoken obligations, I felt empowered to lead both my professional and personal life with integrity. Tomorrow, my real work would begin. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate how far I had come. My future, once dictated by others' expectations, was finally mine to define. The next Monday morning, I stood at the head of Horizon's new boardroom table, the city skyline rising behind me through the large windows. 8 chairs were arranged around the polished oak surface, myself at the head, followed clockwise by 2 senior consultants, the operations manager, the finance director, and at the foot, my parents, Marcus and Eleanor. Their postures were rigid, but their eyes betrayed curiosity. I cleared my throat and began. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our inaugural board meeting under new ownership. Today, we'll finalize our Year 1 goals and assign clear responsibilities. Before we proceed, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work that has kept Horizon afloat during challenging times. Now we move forward with renewed focus." I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared: Financial Recovery Plan. Beneath, bullet points detailed a 25% reduction in overhead through consolidating office space and renegotiating vendor contracts, a monthly audit of director and employee expenses, and a revised client engagement process to ensure timely invoicing and payment. Eleanor shifted in her seat. "Adam, will these changes affect client delivery?" "On the contrary," I replied. "By reallocating resources more efficiently, we can devote more attention to high-value clients. For example, Sarah Patel's charity project will now receive dedicated support from our events team rather than a shared pool, ensuring both quality and timeliness." The operations manager, Nigel, nodded thoughtfully. "That would streamline our workflow. I can revise staffing rosters accordingly." "Ongoing staff training is another priority," I continued. "We'll launch monthly workshops on financial best practices and client relationship management. Our success relies on every team member understanding both their role and its impact on the bottom line." At 10:25, we moved to the director loan repayment update. I addressed Marcus directly. "Dad, you proposed monthly installments of £1,000. Have you submitted your schedule?" Marcus passed a neatly typed sheet across the table. "Yes, I've also earmarked any surplus consultancy fees I earn to accelerate repayment." "Excellent," I said, offering him a small smile. "Consistency here will restore both company health and family trust." Eleanor's turn came next. She placed her repayment plan before me. I'm committed to fortnightly payments of £500 starting this Friday. Thank you, Mum. I paused to let the moment settle. Your cooperation is appreciated. Now let's ensure we stick to these commitments. The final agenda item was family fund reconciliation. I detailed the irregular transfers from Oliver's account into the Harding family fund, now closed and dissolved. I addressed Oliver, who had joined the meeting in a consultant capacity. Oliver, I appreciate your transparency in providing those records. With the fund closed, any future financial support must be formalized through documented agreements reviewed by the board. He met my gaze, nodding solemnly. Understood, Adam. I'll collaborate with finance to set up any necessary grants or advances. As the meeting concluded at 11:15, I felt a palpable shift in the room's energy. No longer were we bound by unspoken resentments or covert transactions. Each director, including my parents, had a clear roadmap, responsibilities, and accountability. Walking back to my office, I reflected on the journey from that midnight knock to this moment of collective resolve. I had forged a path that balanced family ties with professional integrity, proving that leadership, whether over a corporation or one's own life, demands both courage and compassion. The hard work lay ahead, but for the first time I felt certain that Horizon and my family could thrive under transparent, respectful stewardship. By midweek, the rhythm of change at Horizon had become tangible. The office layout was updated. The open-plan seating gave way to defined workspaces tailored to each team's function. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday, I convened a financial controls workshop in the conference room, inviting every staff member, from junior analysts to senior consultants, to participate. The lights were bright, the chairs arranged in a semicircle, and the whiteboard primed with headings like expense authorization, invoice approval, and cost monitoring. I opened with candor. We're here not to blame, but to build. In the past, opaque processes allowed misallocation of funds and unchecked spending. Today, we set a new standard. Hands turned toward me, expressions ranging from curiosity to cautious optimism. First, I introduced the two-signature rule for any expenditure over £1,000. Sarah, a 10-year veteran, asked, "Does this slow down urgent purchases?" I nodded. It adds a checkpoint, but our operations manager, Nigel, is empowered to provide swift approvals when time-sensitive decisions arise. We'll monitor response times and adjust thresholds if necessary. Next, we tackled employee expense reporting. Previously, everyone submitted receipts haphazardly via email, reimbursements were delayed, and the finance team was overwhelmed. I unveiled a simple, cloud-based expense portal authorized by IT that automatically categorizes expenses, flags anomalies, and routes submissions to designated approvers. The finance director, Lucia, demonstrated the system's interface, how to upload a receipt photo, assign cost codes, and track reimbursement status in real time. As the demonstration concluded, junior analyst Priya raised her hand. "Will historical expenses be audited?" I acknowledged her question. "Yes, over the next 2 weeks we'll reconcile past 6 months' entries, prioritizing any reimbursements above £500. This audit isn't punitive. It's to ensure we start fresh on a clean ledger." Midway through the workshop, Eleanor slipped in the back door. She had exchanged her corporate attire for a smart, casual blouse and blazer, an unspoken signal of solidarity. I invited her to share the meeting's final segment, Family Governance Policies. Eleanor stood, voice steady. "As you know, professional boundaries apply equally to family. I'm committing to these controls alongside everyone else. Transparency will guide our decisions, no more side agreements or informal loans. Her words carried weight. The staff's respectful nods were the first genuine sign of familial accountability I had ever witnessed. After the formal session, we opened the floor for questions. Nigel suggested monthly finance health bulletins for the entire company, simple updates on cash flow, upcoming projects, and expense trends. I approved immediately. Lucia proposed quarterly team lunches funded by a capped communal budget, reinforcing morale without extravagance. I smiled. Progress wasn't only in balance sheets, but in cultural shifts. That afternoon, I returned to my flat, found a message from Oliver. Meeting your standards isn't as easy as you make it seem, but I'm taking responsibility. Thank you for holding me accountable. His text revealed a new maturity, a willingness to embrace structure rather than evade it. Later, as evening light waned, I reflected on the workshop's success. Change can provoke resistance, yet our collective willingness to engage showed Horizon's latent resilience. I drafted an email to Jennifer Yates confirming next week's board review and outlining the internal controls now in place. Then I sat at my desk, journal open, and noted, Progress check. 12. Board governance established and accepted. Financial controls workshop completed with full staff participation. Audit of historical expenses initiated. Family governance policy publicly acknowledged. I closed the journal, feeling the quiet satisfaction of meaningful reform. In reclaiming control for the company and for my family's integrity, I had upheld the principle I cherished most. Genuine stewardship demands both accountability and empathy. Horizon was evolving, and so was I. By the following Tuesday, 2 weeks after our financial controls workshop, the audit of historical expenses was complete, and the findings were illuminating. At 8 in the morning, I arrived at Horizon's offices equipped with a detailed report from Lucia, our finance director. The conference room was set up once more for an all-hands meeting, its long table cleared save for my laptop and a printed stack of charts. I greeted the assembled team, consultants, administrators, even Marcus and Eleanor, who had insisted on attending, and began. Last week, we initiated a retrospective audit covering 6 months of expenses. Today, I'll share the results and outline our next steps. Lucia projected a bar chart showing expense categories and flagged anomalies. We identified 42 submissions exceeding £500 without proper authorization. Most were easily resolved with corrected receipts, but 8 required further inquiry. I clicked to the next slide, Findings and Resolutions. Under that heading, bullet points detailed each discrepancy. Travel. 4 instances where mileage. Claims were overstated by as much as 20%, attributed to clerical error rather than malfeasance, corrected and reimbursed within 3 working days. Meals. 2 team meetings billed as client dinners, though no external party was present. Each consultant responsible acknowledged the mistake and committed to transparent categorization going forward. Office supplies. A single receipt coded under IT refurbishment for a personal printer purchased by a family member. That was a holdover from pre-acquisition habits. We've since updated our supplier list to ensure company credit is used only for authorized channels. Directors' loans. 2 entries showing transfers labeled as family housing assistance that lacked supporting documentation. These transfers, one for £2,000, another for £1,500, were traced to the Harding Family Fund before its dissolution. Marcus and Eleanor provided full ledger details last week. We'll reconcile and adjust their repayment schedules accordingly. I paused, letting the transparency sink in. These findings affirm our need for rigorous controls. The room was attentive. Even junior staff, once intimidated by financial oversight, nodded in understanding. Next, I turned to family matters. Oliver and Matilda, you've both submitted your repayment plans. Oliver's monthly £1,000 instalments begin this Friday, and Matilda's fortnightly £500 payments start next Wednesday. Thank you for your commitment. I met their eyes, seeing relief mingled with resolve. Their wedding, once a looming debt trigger, had been indefinitely postponed, another chain broken in our legacy of exploitation. Eleanor raised her hand. Adam, on behalf of Marcus and myself, I want to acknowledge how difficult this has been. We underestimated the impact of informal practices on both the company and our relationships. We're grateful for your leadership. I appreciated her candor. Thank you, Mum. My goal has never been to punish, but to protect our families and this firm's future. As a next step, I propose we establish a quarterly family and finance review, separate from the board, where we can transparently discuss any personal financial assistance requests under formal agreements. Marcus chimed in. That structure will help us avoid the pitfalls of the past. I support this approach. With that consensus, I felt the final barriers fall. We moved on to plan the mechanics of these reviews, and then to our ongoing corporate objectives, client retention, technology upgrades, and exploring new market segments in sustainable development. The dual tracks of family reconciliation and business transformation had begun to converge toward a healthier equilibrium. Later that afternoon, I returned home and opened my journal. I reflected on the audit's success, the staff's engagement, the family's acceptance of structured governance, and the clear path toward genuine accountability. I penned my thoughts. Progress check. 13. Historical expense audit completed. Issues resolved with full transparency. Directors' loan and family fund reconciliations initiated. Commitment received for quarterly family and finance reviews. Wedding postponed until financial stability achieved. Closing the journal, I realized that our vessel, Horizon Strategy Group, was no longer listing under the weight of old secrets. We had charted a course defined by openness and mutual responsibility. And as for me, the architect of this transformation, I had learned that leadership, whether over a company or a family, demands both precision and compassion. The journey continued, but at least now we were all steering in the same direction. The first quarter, under new ownership, drew to a close with measurable progress, a fact I confirmed as I reviewed the latest performance dashboard on a rainy Friday afternoon. I settled into my favorite armchair, overlooking the Thames, notebook in hand, ready to distill our achievements and chart the next phase. By the numbers, revenue had crept upward by 7%, operating costs were down 15%, client retention rates improved from 68% to 75%. These figures, once part of a stagnant ledger, now reflected an organization gaining momentum. I allowed myself a brief, satisfied smile before drafting the agenda for next week's board meeting. That evening, I stepped out of my flat and into the brisk air for my first dinner date in months. I met Rowan, a sustainability consultant I'd connected with at a networking event at a cozy bistro tucked away in Clerkenwell. The table's candlelight danced on her auburn hair as we talked about circular economies and urban greening initiatives, For the first time in years, I felt unburdened by guilt or financial crises, free to explore personal connections alongside professional ambitions. Over seared scallops and green risotto, I shared highlights of Horizon's turnaround, careful not to spill confidential details, and Rowan listened with genuine interest. "It's impressive," she said. "You've steered a faltering company back to health while navigating tough family dynamics." Her words resonated. I realized I had grown far more than merely a corporate leader. Back at home, I reflected on that duality. The boardroom's strategic rigor and the restaurant's warm laughter. I noted in my journal, progress check, 14. Q1 revenue up 7%, operating costs down 15%. Client retention improved by 7 points. Quarterly family and finance review held, agreed on 0 informal transfers. Personal milestone, first date since acquisition, promise of balanced life. Saturday morning, I convened the quarterly family and finance review via video call. My parents, Oliver and Matilda, joined from their respective homes. I outlined the family fund's final reconciliation, all transfers accounted for, outstanding balances scheduled for repayment, and no further unsanctioned withdrawals permitted. Eleanor offered a limpid smile.
"This transparency feels oddly liberating," she admitted.
Marcus nodded in agreement, adding, "I never thought I'd learn so much about my own finances in one meeting." Oliver and Matilda reported steady progress. They'd paid down 30% of their joint credit card debt and were enrolling in a budgeting course at a local community college. Their wedding date remained fluid, but that was no longer a crisis point. Instead, we spoke of future possibilities, a modest ceremony when their finances allowed, one celebrating genuine partnership rather than facades. By Sunday evening, I felt a profound shift. The very concept of family emergency, once a stranglehold on my time and savings, had been redefined as a shared responsibility with clear boundaries. I prepared for the upcoming board meeting with a lightness of spirit I hadn't known before acquisition. Horizon's consultants were drafting proposals to expand our services into social impact advisory, leveraging our renewed reputation. As I closed my journal and turned off the lamp, I recognized the quiet victory underlying our progress. Trust rebuilt through accountability, relationships repaired through structure, personal growth unlocked by saying no when necessary. The daughter who had once sacrificed every penny for others had become the leader who balanced empathy with equity, and in doing so had freed herself to build both a thriving company and a fulfilling life. Sunday dawned with a pale sliver of sun peeking through London's gently swaying plane trees. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey and settled at my writing desk. The pages of my journal spread out before me like stepping stones marking the journey of the past few months. Today, I would reflect on how far Horizon Strategy Group and my own life had transformed since that decisive midnight knock. I traced my finger along the entries from the earliest days when my parents first appeared in my flat, demanding financial assistance for Oliver's wedding. The helpless frustration I had felt then, torn between family loyalty and self-preservation, seemed distant now. Each subsequent entry chronicled a strategic step, engaging a private investigator to uncover Oliver and Matilda's true financial state, negotiating the acquisition of my parents' struggling consultancy, implementing rigorous governance controls, and guiding my family toward accountability. As I sipped the fragrant tea, I realized the unspoken core of this entire saga, reclaiming agency. For years I had been the dependable sibling and dutiful child, absorbing crises, bailing out loved ones, and losing pieces of myself in the process. But in asserting boundaries, insisting on transparency, demanding repayment schedules, and ultimately purchasing Horizon, I had rewritten the rules that governed both my family's finances and my own identity. I was no longer living according to others' expectations. I was the architect of my life. My thoughts turned to the people who had populated this journey. Oliver, once carefree and overly reliant on others, had stepped up to repay his debts and enroll in financial counseling. Matilda, initially defensive and dismissive of budgetary constraints, had embraced structured planning and postponed her wedding until true stability was within reach. My parents, Eleanor and Marcus, confronted their decades-long habits of informal fund transfers and embraced formal governance in both personal and corporate spheres. And then there was Rowan, whose steady companionship reminded me that life should not be all about business battles and boardroom meetings. Our shared laughter over dinner, discussions about urban sustainability, and the simple pleasure of strolls along the canal underscored how necessary balance is to a fulfilling life. I closed my journal and rose, stretching as sunlight warmed my shoulders. The flat was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic, a reminder that London never truly rests. I walked to the window and looked out at the river glinting like molten silver. No longer did I feel trapped by other people's emergencies. Instead, I had the freedom to shape my days according to my own values. In the weeks since the acquisition, Horizon Strategy Group had not only returned to profitability, but also gained a reputation for ethical governance and transparent client relationships. We'd launched our first social impact advisory service, secured 2 new major accounts, and hired a talented cohort of young consultants eager to work in an environment defined by accountability and mutual respect. Tomorrow, I would lead our quarterly board meeting with a report on second quarter growth forecasts. I would welcome fresh proposals from our teams, support innovative ideas, and ensure we maintain the structures that had restored Horizon's vitality. But tonight, I would simply savor the victory of reclaimed autonomy. As evening fell, I prepared a simple dinner, grilled vegetables and couscous, then settled on the sofa with Rowan. We toasted with sparkling water and discussed weekend plans, volunteering at a community garden and exploring a new art exhibit. In that shared moment of calm, I felt the final threads of obligation unwind. The daughter who once sacrificed herself to maintain family harmony was gone. In her place stood a leader, both in business and in life, who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is helping others help themselves. I smiled, grateful for the tumult and triumph that had brought me here. Tomorrow's challenges would arrive, inevitably, but I now faced them with confidence, clarity, and the freedom to choose my own path.